Updating the firmware on your Yaesu radio. Sounds scary, doesn't it? Hi, I'm Ian, G0VGS, and today I'm going to show you how to do exactly that. I'm going to update the firmware on an FTM400XD. You need to update firmware sometimes to enable new features, and Portable HRI mode is a classic example of that. In order to run Portable HRI mode, you need a main firmware minimum of 4.4 and a DSP minimum of 4.31, as you can see here. So the first thing we need to do is find out what our firmware levels are on the radio. So where do we find our firmware versions on the FTM400? Well, unfortunately, they're not all in the same place. They're in two different places, and we get to them by pressing and holding the display button to go into the setup menu. Once in there, there are two places we can find the information we need. There are three parts to the firmware. The two that we're really interested in are the DSP firmware and the main firmware. The DSP firmware can be found in TXRX, Digital, and then scroll down to number 5, and you can see here we're on version 4.15. Now this is on my radio, of course. Your radio may be newer or older. So to find the other piece of firmware that we need, let's press the back button and again, and now go to the reset clone option. And at the top there, you can see that our main is 4.3 and our panel is 1.3. As updating the firmware on your radio involves a factory reset, the first thing you should do is back up. Before we start to update the firmware on the radio, it's a really good idea to back up your configuration. The easiest way to do this is to use a micro SD card. So make sure you've got one of these to hand with the contacts uppermost. Pop that in the slot of the radio and we're ready to start. We need to do two things. We need to format the card and then back up the radio to the card. So press and hold the display button and choose the SD card option. So we have backup and format. So we'll choose format. And we have to use the screen in this instance to say OK. That's formatting, and when it's complete, it will tell you. So the next thing is to back up the radio. So just go back to number 1, backup, select that, and write to the SD card. So we have three options: memory, setup, or all, which is both memory and setup, and that's the one we want. So we're going to select that. And again, we need to use the screen to select OK. That will now write all the details from the radio to the card, and you can see there that's complete. At this point, it'd be a really good idea to take the card out of the radio and import the data from the card into either the Yaesu ADMS software or the RT Systems software to prove that you've actually got all the detail off the radio into the card. Make sure that you've got a good backup of your radio before we start. In order to update the main firmware, we have to throw a switch. That switch is located within the body of the radio, and there are a couple of ways of getting to it. So in this next section, I'll show you how to do that. In order for us to program the main firmware on the FTM400, we have to throw a switch, and that switch is located below this little rubber grommet here on the top of the radio. Now the problem is it's really quite a small opening, and the switch is very small. By the time you've got something inside there to actually throw the switch, you can't really see what's going on. So I prefer to take the lid off. There are 6 screws to remove, 2 on each side and 4 on the top. When you've completed that, just go to the back of the lid and just very gently ease it up and away from the front. And then very carefully just move it to the side. You see there's very little cable on the speaker wires at all. Make a note of where the speaker is plugged in and just remove the lid. Once the lid's removed, you'll see there's a piece of paper here at the front with the word update written on it, and you can see the little switch just here. The beauty of having the lid off is it makes it much easier to throw the switch, because you can actually do it with your finger, so you're not poking in with anything metallic. So here's a closer image, and you can see that to update we need to throw the switch from the front to the back. Just go in with your finger and push that across. That's now ready for an update. When we finish the update, don't forget to throw the switch back to the other position, but always make sure that you've got the power disconnected before you start. The FTM100 and the FTM400 both come with the SCU20 cable, and this is that cable. There's a standard USB plug on one end and a 10-pin plug on the other that goes into the back of the radio. If you haven't already installed the driver for the SCU20 cable, don't plug it in yet. Download the driver from the FTM400 files section on yaesu.com. Install that before you plug in the cable. Instructions on how to do this are in the video Setting Up a WiresX Node Part 1. So having established we need to update the firmware, we now need to get the files from yaesu.com, and you can see here I'm on yaesu.com. I'm going to go to Products, Digital, choose the FTM400 and then go to the Files section for that radio. And down at the bottom you'll see there are 2 different versions of the firmware. One of them works for the FTM400DR and DE, and the other one for the XDR and the XDE, and that's the radio we want. There are various versions of the firmware. The one we want in the UK is the EXP version, so click on that and download it. So having downloaded and extracted the zip file into a folder, you end up seeing something like this. Now there looks to be an awful lot in this folder, but actually it's not as difficult as it looks. The bottom 4 options are manuals in effect, and each one is for an individual section. The top 3 folders here are the main firmware at the top and then the DSP firmware. So it's not really that difficult once you actually break it down. You can see that you do get the SCU20 cable driver in this folder, so if you haven't installed that yet, install that before you plug the lead into the PC. Once you're happy that the SCU20 driver is installed, then we can have a look at the manual for the main firmware, and that's here. Again, there looks to be an awful lot of information in here, but one of the great things about the manual is there's some pictures of the actual radio and what you need to do. So well worth looking at. So let's go into the FTM400XD folder at the top. And here you can see the executable file that we need to run. You can see over here that this is an application. Well, this is going to install the new main firmware for us. So if you double click that and click yes, then that takes you to this box here. The first thing we need to know is what COM port the SCU20 is on, and the easiest way to find that is to go to the Start menu and just type Device Manager. Once you've located Device Manager, just double click it and up it will come. And you can see here ports COM and LPT. Just drop that down and you can see here that our serial COM port is COM3. So we can select COM3 here and click Update. It now gives us a list of things to do. Disconnecting the power cable from the main body. I've done that. Switch the program switch to the update side. I've done that by pushing the switch backwards. Now I need to connect the SCU20 cable to the back of the 400. Finally, we connect the power cable to the main body of the radio. And that's complete. So now I just click the OK button. And you can see immediately it's now updating the main firmware. You don't power on the radio at any point. When the update is complete, you'll see a little box popping up saying firmware update is complete. So just click OK. So now you get a list of things that you need to do to complete. So you need to disconnect the power cable, disconnect the SCU20 cable, switch the program switch back to the normal side and reconnect the power cable. Then we need to do a factory reset. Once we've completed the firmware update, we need to check that the version number has changed, and we also need to do a factory reset. So we do that by pressing and holding the display button and then choosing Reset Clone. And you'll see at the top there our main now says 4.5, so that has been done. So we now need to do a factory reset. So select that and click OK on the screen to complete the factory reset. Once that's completed, the radio will restart as if you'd just got it. So you just need to pop anything in there just to create a call sign for the moment. Just a single letter will do. The radio will restart again and come up. Remember, we're going to restore all our details once we've finished doing the firmware updates. Updating the DSP firmware is a little different. We don't have to throw any switches, but we do have to put the radio into a particular mode. So for this one, we're going to PC Tools, and here is our application. So we'll start that, and we know that we're on COM3. Click OK, and here it tells you exactly what you need to do. Before updating, make sure to follow this procedure. Connect the cable to the data terminal and the PC, connect the external power to the transceiver, and turn the transceiver on in C4FM DSP F/W write mode. And we do that by one of these usual multiple key presses. So we turn the transceiver on pressing the power, function and DX buttons all together. You can see there it says DSP update on the screen, and it tells us to push the D key. So we push that, and now we can click update. It pops up a box to check that we're updating to a newer version, and then we click OK. And once the update is complete, we get a little box popping up to tell us that's happened. Click OK, and it tells you exactly what to do again. Turn the transceiver off, disconnect the cable, and then reconnect the power to the transceiver. So once we've completed the steps, we need to just check that our firmware is showing us updated. So press and hold the display button, go to the TX-RX option, Digital, and scroll down to item number 5, and then we can see that our DSP version is now version 4.31. So all the firmware on this radio has now been updated. Finally, we need to restore the backup that we made before we started. So pop the SD card back into the radio, press and hold display, and then choose the SD card option. Choose backup, and we want to read from the SD card. The only option we've got is all, so select that and click OK on the screen, and that's now restoring our previous backup. Once that's completed, the radio will restart and come up with your configuration that you previously had. So we've backed up the radio, installed the new firmware, done a factory reset and restored our original configuration. I hope you found that useful. Until the next time, cheerio. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please click the like button and do consider subscribing to the channel. If you click the bell icon, YouTube will notify you every time I release a new video.